Picture this, a mob of starving Parisian women, not soldiers, not politicians, marching 12 miles through pouring rain, armed with pikes and cannons to drag a king out of his palace. And it worked. Most people think the French Revolution was a glorious uprising where the people united, overthrew a tyrant, and built a democracy. Clean, noble, inspiring. But what if I told you that the real French Revolution was nothing like that? That it was messy, contradictory, and deeply terrifying, even for the people who started it? That the revolution ended up killing more of its own heroes than it ever killed nobles? That the liberty it promised came wrapped in one of the bloodiest government-sponsored killing sprees in European history? Today, we are going to tear apart everything you think you know about the French Revolution, the myths, the missing pieces, and the shocking truths that most textbooks conveniently skip over. Let's go back to Paris, 1789. Here's the version most of us grew up with. France in 1789 was a kingdom suffering under the boot of an arrogant, out-of-touch king, Louis XVI. His queen, Marie Antoinette, famously dismissed starving peasants by saying, "Let them eat cake." The French people, fed up with centuries of royal oppression and aristocratic privilege, finally rose up. They stormed the Bastille prison, the ultimate symbol of royal tyranny, freed the prisoners, and launched a revolution that gave the world the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. From that moment, the story goes, the people were in charge. They abolished the monarchy, created a republic, and paved the way for modern democracy. Yes, it was violent, but it was a necessary violence, a heroic struggle, the birth pangs of the modern world. This is the version Hollywood loves. It's the version that fits neatly on a poster. A ruthless king, a careless queen, a heroic people, and a glorious dawn of freedom. But almost every single piece of that story is either incomplete, exaggerated, or flat out false. Let's start with Marie Antoinette and the cake. She never said it. Not once. The phrase, "let them eat cake," or in French, qu'ils mangent de la brioche, appears in the writings of philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, written when Marie Antoinette was just 9 years old and still living in Austria. Historians have searched her letters, diaries, and court records. There is zero evidence she ever said those words. The quote was retroactively attached to her by revolutionary propaganda because she made a perfect villain, young, foreign, extravagant. And Louis XVI, the tyrant who ignored his suffering people? The reality is considerably more complicated. Louis was actually one of the more reform-minded French kings in generations. He supported the American Revolution financially and philosophically. He appointed progressive ministers who tried to tax the nobility, the very class most resistant to change. He genuinely struggled with France's financial crisis. He was not a monster. He was, by most historical accounts, an indecisive and overwhelmed man caught in a crisis far larger than himself. Now, the Bastille. July 14th, 1789, the date France still celebrates as Bastille Day. When the mob stormed that prison, they freed exactly 7 prisoners. 7. Not hundreds of political dissidents, not chained revolutionaries. 7 men, including 4 forgers, 2 lunatics, and 1 aristocrat imprisoned by his own family for bad behavior. The Bastille at that point was nearly empty. The king had already been planning to demolish it. The storming of the Bastille was symbolically enormous, but as a military operation to free the oppressed, it was almost meaningless. Now here is where the story gets truly dark. The revolution did not create liberty. Not immediately. What it created was something called the Committee of Public Safety, which is perhaps the most misleading name in all of political history. Between 1793 and 1794, under the leadership of Maximilien Robespierre, this committee launched what became known as the Reign of Terror. Robespierre was a lawyer, an intellectual, an idealist, a man who had once publicly opposed the death penalty, and yet He oversaw the execution of approximately 17,000 people through official channels, with estimates of up to 40,000 dying in total, including those killed without formal trial. The guillotine worked so fast in Paris that blood literally pooled in the streets around Place de la Révolution, today called Place de la Concorde. Who were the victims? Yes, some were aristocrats and clergy, but the majority, the overwhelming majority, were ordinary French citizens, peasants, workers, small-town mayors, anyone accused of being insufficiently revolutionary. The accusation alone was often enough for a death sentence. And Robespierre himself? He was arrested in July 1794 and guillotined the very next day. The revolution consumed its own architect. This period is not a footnote. It is the heart of what the French Revolution actually was. This is not revisionist history. These are established, documented facts accepted by mainstream historians worldwide. The myth of Marie Antoinette's quote has been debunked by historians, including Lady Antonia Fraser in her landmark 2001 biography simply titled Marie Antoinette, which spent years in archival research across Austrian and French records. The prisoner count at the Bastille is documented in French National Archives. The prison's own logbooks from July 14, 1789 confirm exactly 7 inmates at the time of the storming. The death toll of the Reign of Terror is drawn from the work of historians Donald Greer and more recently Jean-Clement Martin, whose research into Revolutionary Tribunal records gives us the most accurate picture we have. Roughly 16,594 official death sentences, with tens of thousands more dying in mass executions in the provinces, particularly during the suppression of the Vendée uprising in western France. That uprising, the Vendée, is itself one of the most suppressed stories of the Revolution. When the largely Catholic, royalist peasants of the Vendée region refused to support the revolution and rebelled, the Republican government sent in what they called infernal columns. These were military units with orders to kill everything: men, women, children, livestock, crops. Some historians estimate between 100,000 and 250,000 people died in the Vendée between 1793 and 1796. There have been serious academic debates, particularly in France, about whether this constitutes an early modern genocide. The revolutionary government also attempted to abolish Christianity entirely, replacing it with a new state religion called the Cult of Reason, and later the Cult of the Supreme Being, both invented by the same government that claimed to be liberating the French people from oppression. Here is the twist that almost nobody talks about. The French Revolution did not produce a republic, not in any lasting sense. After years of chaos, terror, and political instability, after 5 different governments in less than a decade, the French people were exhausted. And into that exhaustion stepped a young, brilliant, ambitious military general from Corsica, Napoleon Bonaparte. In November 1799, just 10 years after the revolution began, Napoleon staged a coup, dissolved the Republican government, and made himself first consul of France. By 1804, he crowned himself emperor. Think about that. The revolution that began by cutting off a king's head ended by creating a new emperor. An emperor who would go on to conquer most of Europe and cause the deaths of somewhere between 3 and 6 million people in the Napoleonic Wars. The irony is almost too large to process. The French people overthrew an absolute monarchy in the name of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and within a single generation, voluntarily handed power to a man who was arguably more powerful than Louis XVI ever was. But here is the even deeper twist. The revolution's ideals did not die with Napoleon. They spread. The Revolutionary Wars and Napoleon's campaigns carried concepts like constitutional government, civil law codes, and the abolition of feudalism across Europe. The famous Napoleonic Code, the legal framework Napoleon spread across his empire, became the foundation of legal systems in France, Belgium, Louisiana, Quebec, and dozens of other places to this day. So the French Revolution simultaneously produced the Reign of Terror, accidentally birthed Napoleon, and created the legal and philosophical foundations of much of the modern democratic world. It was catastrophic and transformative at the same time. A disaster that changed everything for the better, or a great idea that went terribly wrong, depending on which decade you look at and which street corner in Paris you were standing on. So what is the real lesson of the French Revolution? It is not a simple story of heroes and villains. It is not a clean arc from oppression to freedom. It is a deeply human story about what happens when a society reaches its breaking point, when injustice becomes unbearable, when institutions collapse, and when idealistic people with genuine grievances gain power faster than they gain wisdom. The French Revolution gave the world concepts that billions of people live by today: human rights, representative government, the separation of church and state. These are not small gifts, but it delivered them wrapped in rivers of blood, including the blood of the very people who fought for them. Marie Antoinette never said, "Let them eat cake." The Bastille held 7 prisoners. The revolution's greatest champion died on his own guillotine, and the republic built in the name of the people ended in a one-man empire. History is almost always more complicated than the version we were taught, and that is precisely what makes it worth studying. If this video made you see the French Revolution differently, drop a comment below and tell me what surprised you the most. And if you want more of these deep dives into the history they forgot to teach us, subscribe to Truth Behind History. New video dropping every week. We are just getting started.